Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first virtual EE community meetup. Of course, put together by the EE conference committee. And if you don't already know, we're going to have a one-day conference here at the end of this month, and we can share some information about that. Definitely check out our Twitter account, all that kind of fun stuff. And then also, we're going to try to have these meetups more often as well. So if you're interested in speaking at one of these and presenting like TJ is doing today, just a quick talk on one subject, and then we can kind of hang out and all that. I know if you don't know me, by the way, I'm Andy McCormick. I'm with the Expression Engine team, kind of project manager and operations over there, and also a volunteer on the EE conference committee. And I know a core thing that we've talked about on the Expression Engine team is the community around Expression Engine. That's always been a core part of Expression Engine, and what keeps the product great, what keeps the community great, and keeps us thriving. So we're really excited for everyone to be here. Just a little bit about housekeeping on how things are going to work today. So if you didn't join us in the fall conference, this is our platform hop-in, or the platform that we're using for our conferences and meetups. You've already found the stage, hopefully. And then next, after TJ is done, I'll come back on here for a few minutes, and then we'll head over to the sessions. So on the left-hand side of your screen, you'll see the sessions. There are 5 or 6 rooms, limited to 10 people per room to kind of encourage discussion, but that's where we're head out after the talk and just kind of hang out, and you can chat about whatever you want, really. You can talk about Git, you can talk about Expression Engine, talk about best place to get a taco, I don't know, whatever you guys want to do, your favorite coffee or tea, all that kind of stuff. So again, it's really just think of this as you would a meetup in person. It's just virtual. Today we're doing it kind of in the morning hours, different times, different days. We'll try different times next time, just to try to get our audience around the world involved. So I appreciate everybody being able to make it. I know this is kind of towards the middle of your day for some people. It's at the end of your day, or some people are just waking up. But hopefully this is a good time for the majority of people. TJ's talk should be recorded. That is the plan. Plans always sometimes get messed up with technology, but that's the plan. And then we'll post to our YouTube channel once we have that ready.
Hey, Andy, quick question.
Yes.
There's an event chat and a stage chat. Which one should people be using? Because we've been in the event chat, but
yeah, if everybody could migrate over to the stage chat, that would be great. That way, of course, the polls that I created are in the event chat. So, but anyways, yeah. So if you can head on over to the stage chat, that would be great, because that's where we're going to be. And you can submit your Q&A there as well. If you just put it in the chat, it might get lost in the chatter. I'll try to manage it, though. Looks like we got about 41 people with us today. That's an awesome turnout. Really excited about that. So I guess, do you think that's it? I did mention before in one of the tweets or posts that we're going to draw for a free conference ticket. So again, after TJ's chat or talk, then I'm going to come back on here, and I guess I'll try to share my screen and do a random number drawing here. So that'll be awesome for somebody. And if you have any questions about the conference, about the EE conference in general, about what we do as a committee, anything like that, feel free to grab us in the sessions as well afterwards, and we can talk more about that. So, all right, without further ado, I think everybody knows him, one of our fellow EE conference organizers and owner of Buzzing Pixel, and has been around the community for quite some time. Always a pleasure to work with. Worked with him a lot on different projects and everything, and a good friend. So I will let TJ take it away.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and try to get my screen share going here. Oh, no. Hang on a second. I have to open system preferences. Thought I'd already done this dance before with Hop-In and my browser, but apparently not. So, now I have to quit and reopen Edge. Andy, you may have to let me back in. Mac OS is not letting it do the screen sharing until I quit and reopen Edge. So that's fun. I'll be right back.
All right, so I guess I get to keep on talking for a little bit. So in the chat, do head on over to the poll and answer that real quick about if you use Git or not. I know it's in the event chat. Sorry, I didn't realize there was 2 separate things. Looks like 91.3% of everybody here uses Git, so that's very encouraging. Few people that don't use it, they don't understand it, or they're a one-person team and don't feel they need it. So that's interesting. That's a common thought process. I didn't think I needed it when I used to freelance. I've learned to love it whether I'm working with other people or not, though. If you have other reasons you don't use Git, feel free to share them in the stage chat and let us know. I know that might help TJ in his talk. We promise this is a safe space, so no one is going to gang up on you and scold you for not using Git. And we'll try this again with TJ.
Give me a second. I'm still, since I had to quit and restart my browser, I have to get all my windows back up, and it's a nightmare.
Okay. All right. Well, TJ, if you did not hear, we've got about 90% of the people use Git. A few people do not use Git, and either because they don't understand it or they are only a one-person team and don't think they need it. So,
yeah, for sure. I'm just getting everything set back up the way I had intended for it to be. And I am now ready to try sharing my screen again. There we go. And should be that one. All right.
All right. Looks good.
And how did that get there? Fahrenheit versus Celsius versus Kelvin. Yeah. Anyway, let me get rid of that. And I need to pull up the chat to make sure that I can see any comments that come through. Waiting for Jeff to comment on my Fahrenheit versus Celsius. So my presentation is, I've titled it Git Confidence, which I have done before. But I really have, over the last few years, honed in on some various approaches with Git. And so I redid this presentation based on my last few years of experience with Git. A lot of the stuff is still the same. A lot of the core concepts are still the same, but I've changed my branching model a little and helped implement a branching model at HappyCog when I was there at HappyCog that was very successful and that the company was adopting in a lot of projects. Of course, every project can be a little different, but anyway, the branching model that I'm going to be advocating for is kind of tried and true, you might say. So, I'm hoping to help you understand a better way to use Git or to, as Andy said, 90% of you are already using Git, but I'm hoping to kind of maybe instill some new paradigms in you to help you think about Git and your code. So let me go ahead and get started here. I've got a floating window in the way. Here we go. So this is the obligatory slide, right? I'm your friendly neighborhood software developer, although apparently this morning in private chat, I came off a little passive aggressive, which happens sometimes, but I try to be your friendly neighborhood software developer. I recently took a job as senior software engineer at RX Ante. Previously, I was at HappyCog for a little over a year and a half, almost 2 years. And I was the web team lead at DeBose Web. And before that, I was senior developer at Caddis Interactive. So those are kind of why you might want to listen to me, because I've been in the business and made all the mistakes, right? So I've been in the business since 2003 in some form or fashion. This is my family. I need to get a more current picture into these slides because my son there that's the tallest there, he's almost as tall as I am now. So I need to get some new pictures in there. But this is my family. Love them to death. And so what we're going to be covering today is kind of an effective way to use version control. Kind of a commit philosophy. How should you commit? When should you commit? What should your commit messages be? How can you effectively leverage commits? And using Git with databases and deployments. So let's talk about the Git workflow and the branching model that I'm going to be advocating for. So with this model, we're going to try to help you understand how to know when to branch, know when to merge those branches, and how you can develop with a strategy. So keep in mind, this is just a possible workflow. I have no problem with modifying workflows to suit the needs of a project. So what I'm going to show you is kind of a base and something that worked really well on a couple of projects that I was on at HappyCog. It's a workflow I've really enjoyed, and we do something a little bit different currently at RxAnti where I'm now at, but it's I don't think it's quite as good, but it works fine too. So you can modify these concepts and take them and use them kind of as a base. So I don't know if any of you have heard of trunk-based development. I've kind of migrated away from the Git flow methodology and something closer to trunk-based development. I've found personally that trunk-based development doesn't quite work for the type of stuff we tend to do on the web, and especially if you're doing client-related work. You don't want stuff in trunk until it's been approved and ready to go. And the idea of trunk-based development is you're always committing to trunk. Like everything's going in the trunk. If you have a feature branch, you get it back in the trunk right away. Trunk being your main branch, right? So what I advocate for, and what I found works really, really well, is something I call release-based development. And it really only works well if you release often, and I advocate that you release often. So in release-based development, you have one main branch. This branch can be named whatever you want, trunk, main, master, warp speed, like whatever you want, as long as you understand which branch is your trunk branch or your main branch, and you call it that, and that's your main branch. This branch would be the source of truth for the project. This is the canonical, code of that project. And the branch should always be production ready. Any code in this model, any code in that branch should be considered released production code. Nothing in that branch should break anything if possible. I mean, obviously this is software development and we do break stuff, but we try to keep the main branch ready for release and released. So it's always released code. Okay, then you have release branches and release-based development, and I advocate for one release branch at a time. There are different ways of thinking about this. You might be prepping 2 or 3 releases at a time, but I advocate for one release branch, and you know that when code is in that release branch, it's going out in the next release. So release branches in this model are created from the main branch when the previous release branch has been merged and to main and then deleted. So during your release process, when you release, you merge that release branch into main, you delete that branch. It's gone, it's done. Its life cycle is short. And then you create a new one. And so, as I said, releases should happen on a quick and short cycle. For instance, at HappyCog, the main project that I was on, we released once a week, and it was a scheduled release on Wednesdays. And, twice a week, in my opinion, would be better. Especially for projects that are moving faster or we have more developers and are committing more features, once stuff is approved, you want it out there in production. So I think twice a week would be really good. I do not advocate that you release on Fridays. Very rarely do we break this rule, only for business needs of the client or what have you. So don't release on Friday if you can help it. But the overarching principle here is that releases should not be huge and gargantuan. Whenever possible, you shouldn't be releasing a lot of things. Don't be trying to wrap up, well, I'm going to do this feature and this feature. I'm going to make this big bundle and have this big release. And the reason for that is because when you do big releases and there's a problem, it's harder to track down. Maybe you wrote that code weeks ago or months ago, and then you're like, well, I don't understand what's causing this and how this is interacting. So when you have shorter release cycles, it's easier to know, okay, there's a smaller change set for me to look in to see what I did that broke stuff. Okay, so really easy when you do short release cycles. So again, I advocate for one release branch at a time. I think this makes things far less confusing. And when you merge something into your feature branch into a release branch, and you put code in that release branch, you know what's going out in the next release. So one release branch at a time makes this really easy. So then we have our working branches, as I've alluded to in this model. You have your feature branches, also called topic branches. Very often, and at HappyCog and at RxAnti too, where I'm at now, we prefix all of our branches with the Jira ticket number. Whatever ticketing system you're using, you could do that too, but we prefix it with the Jira ticket number. And there's some integrations. We're using Git Lab. We use GitHub at HappyCog, and there's some integrations you can have that point you back and forth between Jira. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. We prefix with the ticket number, the ticket key, and then a short and sweet description of what you're working on, just to identify the branch. So that's a topic branch. And so what you want to do is you want to break your work into sensible units. And developers, this is where you can kind of help your project managers sometimes, because they may send you a Jira ticket or a ticket in your ticketing system, or however they get work to you, and that work may encompass a lot more than a single branch. And so you can make sub-tickets in Jira, for instance. You can create your own kind of list of things and have branches that are related to that, and you want to break it up into logical units so that you can get that work released. Even if you're in the middle of a cycle, I think oftentimes I find it really great to release work, even if it's not ready to go live. And if there's, you get it out there, for instance, schema changes in the database or code that relies on that and that sort of thing, get it out there as soon as possible. Even if you have a feature flag that you're like, this part of the site's not live yet, but we're going to get that code out there and make sure it's not causing other problems. So break your work into sensible units that can be released quickly into production. So you create a branch for that unit. That branch always starts from the main branch. And you keep those change sets as small as possible so that you're not, wrapping up these huge gargantuan releases. And you merge into the release branch as soon as possible. So when you start the branch from main, and then that branch, when it's ready, merges into your release branch so that it's ready for the next release. And of course, you have, you can do this via pull requests. You have code reviews and CI tools and all these things. It's a little beyond the purview of this presentation, but those tools all work great with this model. Of course, as you're developing, sometimes you have features that can take some time. They're of a nature that you can't release quickly. I'm actually working on a feature like that right now at RxAnti. And so the key thing here is if these branches live longer than a release cycle, you're wanting to pull your main branch into your development, into your feature branch as often as you can, and so that you're catching merge conflicts and you're catching things that are changing, and you're not working in a silo, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, the stuff that's happened in the couple of weeks that I've been working on this is not compatible with what I did. And so you're constantly merging work from main into, as needed, into your branch. That's the trunk part of trunk-based development, right? Is keeping your work current with everybody else's. And so if you're merging your main branch into your feature branch as often as needed and catching those merge conflicts, you're going to have quite a bit better time, because you're resolving those merge conflicts quickly while the context of what you're doing is fresh. I find it to be the worst when you've got a branch that's stale and you try to merge in develop or main or trunk or whatever it is your main branch, and you get all kinds of merge conflicts and you have no idea what the correct resolution for that conflicted line is, because you don't have the context fresh in your head, because you weren't working on it. So you want to merge this in constantly and not let branches get stale. And always resolve those merge conflicts in your feature branch, right? So that you have it ready to go and merge right into your release branch. And as much as possible, you want to keep that branch ready to merge in. Like I said, it's really great when you can work in such a way. It's not always possible, but I find it's possible a lot more than you might think, to work in such a way that you commit code that doesn't break anything and that could be released if you needed to. Okay. And here's a key thing of topic branches. When they're completed, they should be removed. You prune those branches when they're merged, and you don't have to worry about them anymore. You're trying to keep, you don't want lots and lots of branches hanging around. It just get really confusing. So prune and remove those branches when they're merged into your release branch. All right, so then we have further topic branches for hotfixing, and there's really no difference in terms of how you create this branch. It's just the difference of this work needs to go straight to production when it's done, because it's a hotfix. So I follow the same pattern with these branches: ticket number, and then a short, quick description of the bug or the issue that you're fixing. And again, you create these working branches from main. And you create those commits that fix the issue. And the difference here is, if it really is a hot fix, it needs to go out right away. I'm skipping ahead of myself. So if you have supporting branches, which we'll talk about in a minute, for staging or QA, and you need to preview and get approval from your client or something like that, you can merge there and deploy those. And then if it really is a hot fix, you merge into your main and deploy as needed. And of course, you can still go through your pull requests and code review and all that as needed. The timing depends on the severity of the break. I definitely had times when something seemed like a critical issue. The client was, it's on fire. And I made that branch, I fixed it, I created the pull request ready to go, and I pushed it out there to staging, and I said, hey, take a look. Does this solve your issue? And there's like, you know what? Let's just wait for the next release cycle. So then at that point, I changed to merge it into the release branch instead and wait for the next release cycle. So, but hot fixes definitely happen. And that has definitely come up. So in those cases, I merge straight into main and deploy. And again, just like with your other topic branches, when complete, make sure those branches get pruned and removed so you're not confused about what the state of those is. Everything is clean and tidy and neat. So the support branches that I talked about, you can have any number of branches, obviously, in Git. And in this model, provided they have a purpose and a clear name, such as staging, for instance, you might have that staging branch or a QA branch or several of those branches for different, staging. Often we had a staging and a QA at HappyCog, and those deployed to two different instances. And the QA we kept super clean and as close to production as possible. And staging was a little messier, features always coming into it that needed to be tested internally. And then QA was more for the client and that sort of thing. You can have all these kinds of strategies, and those can have branches associated with them. The key thing to remember is in this model, the canonical branch is main. These branches are not canonical, and they should be considered one-way branches. You put code into them to get them out where they need to be, but you don't pull code out of them because you probably have code in there that's not ready to release. And so merging from a support branch into your main branch usually can cause problems, right? So just consider them temporary, ephemeral, one-way branches. You're not putting code in there. That there should never be code in these branches that's the only place where the code is, because it's hard to get it out of there if you have other stuff in those branches that isn't ready to release. So one-way branches is the key here. And code goes in from main or feature branches. And you can delete and recreate these as needed if you consider them ephemeral. Like if stuff gets in a weird state, you just delete that branch, create it again from main or from your feature or whatever is needed, and you're good to go. So again, I'm emphasizing this. Remember to prune your topic branches, prune your release branches. Leaving those old branches laying around can get really confusing, and don't let branches get stale as much as possible. I know sometimes you get stuff out there, you put it out there for the client, and then they get back to you with feedback 3 weeks later. But as much as possible, keep those branches from getting stale. Merge your main branch into those feature branches and those hotfix branches as needed, right, to keep them up to date, and don't let things get stale. As far as pruning goes, your various tools, Git Lab has this. GitHub obviously is the most common tool. What's some of the others? They all have this, as far as I know. Every tool I've used has this. You can delete your branches when you do a pull request, and you can delete them right there after the pull request has been merged into the master branch or the main branch. So the key components that I see of release-based, and again, this is based on years and years of starting out with Git flow and understanding that, and then really kind of migrating over to this closer to trunk-based philosophy. And the key components here are to release early and release often. Get those releases out there. Don't let your code be sitting around in a silo and like, we're going to wrap this up and in 6 months we're going to release this big thing. No, get it out there. As you keep moving, it's much easier to develop, and you don't get these weird bugs that crop up. So release early, release often. Keep your branches up to date with other work, and don't work on your branches in isolation. Keep those branches up to date with the rest of the code. Can somebody, I know there's a little bit of a delay, but somebody in the chat is saying that I paused for everyone. So if somebody can chime in, and is it just one person or is everybody paused? If you can chime in the chat, that would be great. And I'll wait a minute. No, never mind. Ignore me, Justin says. Okay. I'm going to assume everybody can hear me. Okay. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and then we'll move on to commit philosophy. And by the way, if anybody has any questions, make sure you're getting them in there. I'm not watching the chat super closely, but there will be a Q&A as we go and afterward. So let's talk about commit philosophy. So first of all, we have to talk about the states that files can be in Git. And those states are: a file can be modified or added. That's considered modified. A file can be staged so that it's ready to be committed. It's put in the stage, and then when you commit, the stuff that's staged will get committed. And so that's the third state that a file can be in Git, is committed. So your Git workflow looks a little bit like this. You add or modify files, you stage the modifications, you commit, and you rinse and repeat. And that's the development cycle with Git. And of course, you can push. Git is decentralized. There's no such thing as as far as Git knows, there's no such thing as the canonical Git server or the Git repo, but you can push and pull from different repos, and we tend to designate, like GitHub as the canonical source of code. But in general, this is the Git workflow. So keep in mind that Git doesn't know about your work until it is staged. You can modify stuff, and if something happens, or you blow it away, like Git doesn't know anything about that. It's not in the Git database. And so committing is really when Git takes charge of your code. You can stage it, and it's there. Your local version of Git knows about the code. And then when you commit it, it goes into Git's database. And obviously, there are ways to remove commits and screw things up. But in general, unless you're issuing funky commands, it's really hard to lose work once it's committed. If it's local to your hard drive, as long as your hard drive doesn't crash, it's going to be in that Git database. And when you push it out to your origin server, the one you've designated like GitHub as your canonical repo, like that work is there. It's not going anywhere. So once you commit your work, it's very difficult to lose it. So make sure that you're committing early and committing often. Keep that code committed and into Git, and I would advocate for pushing it to your origin server as much as possible. You don't want to be committing hundreds of lines of code. Obviously, there are other benefits, but in terms of making sure you don't lose any work, committing early, committing often, and getting it out there, and not hundreds of lines at a time. Obviously, the other benefits of this too are that you can understand what's happening in a single commit. So you want to commit with a clearly defined and simple subject. You want to write in such a way that with that subject that it says the commit affects the code base in such and such a way. And if your commit does more than that, more than you can describe in that subject, you're not committing often enough, at least in my opinion. So here's a tip. I actually don't really do this anymore, but early on, this was very helpful for me. It's so internalized now that as I'm writing code, I'm like, what am I working on? I'm doing that, and I'm going to commit it. But if you're not in that mindset, what can be really helpful is to write out your commit message. Yes, Jeff in the chat says git commit fix stuff. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So, this tip is to write your commit message before you write your code. And what that does is it puts you in the frame of mind of this is what I'm doing, and when I finish it, I'm going to commit it into the code base and push it so that that logical section of work is committed. So write that commit message and then do the thing that the commit message says. Now, obviously, sometimes you work on I do this all the time. You're working on something, you realize, oh, I need this other thing first. And so there is git stash, and sometimes I use that, but sometimes also I'll just fix it. I'll go and do the thing that I need to do in order to do the thing I meant to do, and then I commit that work, and then I continue on. So that does happen, but in general, it's good to get in this mindset. I think it makes you a better, more focused software developer. So that's a little bit of my commit philosophy at a high level. Yes, Roger, I will talk about that in a minute. I am using a GUI. I think everybody should be familiar with Git on the command line, but yes, I am using a GUI mostly. So I want to get a little more philosophical with my commit messages here. I believe, and there's a great blog post by Chris Beams that I'll link to here in a minute, that a formatted commit subject should always complete the following sentence. So when applied, this commit will, and then you finish that sentence for your commit message. It's like you're instructing Git what to do. When this commit is applied, this is what it does to the code base. And what that does is it makes writing really simple and really clear, and it just sort of flows naturally. When you start that sentence in your head and you complete it, it flows naturally. Here's some positive examples. When applied, this commit will add user entity. When applied, this commit will update the README. When applied, this commit will add a style sheet to the master template, etc. We'll fix user access bug. Like, it becomes very clear at a high level what you're doing to your code base when you write in this style. These, of course, as Jeff pointed out in the chat, git commit fix stuff. When applied, this commit will fix stuff. I suppose it finishes the sentence, but it's not very applicable. It doesn't tell you what's happening in your code base. So when applied, this commit will changes. Like, we've all seen these, right? We get frustrated. We type furiously into our command line or our GUI tool, and we commit, and it's all broken and all that. We get frustrated. But it's not very helpful in the future. So when you're trying to figure out what commits do what, writing in the style that we talked about here is much more useful. And this definitely becomes relevant as you, for instance, if you do release something and it breaks something unexpected, you didn't catch it in QA and you get it out in production, and oh, you've got to find out. So I know that it breaks this thing. Let me look through my commit messages and at a high level see what I think might have affected it. This makes it much more useful to understand. And then you can look at the changes you made in that commit. You can revert that commit. All sorts of things become possible. But when you're not writing good commit subjects, it's much harder to find. So again, why is this important? It's because it explains how the code base is changing. It makes commit message subjects clear and concise. It makes writing commit messages easy. And as we just talked about, it increases the likelihood of usefulness. And it keeps everyone writing in one style so that you're not having to switch context as you're reading through commit messages and understanding what's happening in your code base. If everyone's writing in that style, it's much easier to get your head around. There's a lot less overhead that you have to kind of work through as you're reading through commit messages. And as I mentioned, Chris Beams, this post he posted years ago, but this is the part that hasn't changed for me. I find this still super useful. I just recently read through it again to make sure I agreed with it, and it's really good. I really highly recommend this blog post by Chris Beams on Git commits and how to make those useful. So as I mentioned, I believe you should break your commits up into logical segments or logical commits that don't break the code and that can be released if possible as you make commits. Sometimes, though, as I mentioned, you find out that you need to go work on something else in order to do the thing you meant to do. And so you might have several things that need to be broken up into logical commits in your code base. So I wanted to kind of step through how to do that. As I mentioned, I use a GUI tool. I will also demonstrate some of this on the command line because I do think everyone should be familiar with Git on the command line, because ultimately what's happening is that these GUI tools are doing the thing that the binary that you're instructing Git through the command line does. Like, it's great to understand how Git actually works. And if you're doing, easy, changes that you can just git add dot and git commit, commit message, the command line is great and can be fast. But I use Sublime Merge as my favorite right now. I think it is the best paradigm for understanding Git in terms of the GUI. It makes it really easy to view and visualize your changes and look through the change log as you're committing. And it has a great interface in general, and it has a command palette. So if you're a Sublime Text user, which I use Sublime Text for a lot of things, it's my default text editor, and I use PHP Storm for actual work. But the command palette in Sublime Text is great, and Sublime Merge has a command palette so that you can actually just use the keyboard to use Sublime Merge. It's really great. So obviously, committing all three of these at once probably makes a lot of sense, but for the purposes of illustration, I'm going to say that's too much. We want to break this down into logical commits. So this is just the status of what's going on. You can see the three files here in the GUI. This is what it would look like on the command line. If you do a git status, it shows you that you have a modified file and two new files. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit the user entity first. So in Sublime Merge, I would click Stage, and then I would in the command line, you can also do git add and then the full path to the file that you're trying to add, and not just git add dot, which would add everything that needs to be committed. So git add and then that path. And then I did a git status to show that file is now staged for committing, and the other two files remain unstaged and untracked. So I'm going to type a really clear and concise, subject that instructs Git what it's doing. And so if you read that, this commit adds a user entity. And so I staged that file, and I'm going to click commit there, or in the command line, I would do git commit -m for message, and then type in my message. And then, as you can see with git status, that file is no longer staged and it's no longer modified or untracked. So it's in Git. It's good to go. I'm going to do the same thing with this. Add service to get the user current. Obviously, I'm cheating here. I'm not getting the current user. I'm creating a new user whose name is Jean-Luc Picard, and he's the captain. And I'm going to commit that service to get the current user. Now here's where I wanted to get a little more interesting. I've written some stuff in this file. Let's say it's not, because obviously, again, it probably makes more logical sense to commit this all together. But for the purpose of illustration, I want to commit just the modifications to say hello, the say hello method. And so in the Git GUI here in Sublime Merge, I can actually select the lines I want to commit and then stage those lines. And then when I click stage lines, only those lines are staged from that file. The rest is still left for me to commit later. So you can see here I've done that, and I've updated. I've got my commit message ready to go. Update say hello to use the current user's name, and so you can see that only those changes that I selected. Yes, Doug Lai was actually just coming to that. Doug says in the chat, committing lines is a huge benefit of GUI over CLI, and that is primarily why I use the GUI. Is the visibility of changes, and you don't have to step through this. This is possible to do in the command line. You can use the -p flag, and you can kind of walk through it, but it's difficult. I've done it before, but I don't even remember how to do it off the top of my head. It's just difficult in the command line, and so this is why we have GUI tools. All right, and so then finally, I'm going to commit that other method that I added, and I'm going to add a method to say goodbye, so I can simply stage that file and commit it, and then we're good to go. So now look at our commit history. You can see there that they're broken into what we're calling, and for the purposes of this illustration, logical commits. It's very clear what's happening when you just read through that history. It's clear and concise, and most importantly, none of those commits broke anything. Everything would continue to work if we release that into production. So that's just a really simple kind of illustration. And I'm walking through the commits here. I'm just selecting each of them and looking at the changes, which is another, again, it's the benefit of the GUI tool. So that is commits. And again, if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them afterward. So next, we're going to talk about using Git with databases and deployments.
TJ, do you want to take any questions now, or do you want to wait till the end?
I'd say let's wait till the end, unless there's anything that, yeah, I think let's wait till the end. It's easier for me to keep going with my brain in the space, I think.
All right, perfect.
So for this, I'm mostly focusing on websites and SaaS applications, which is, I think, the sort of things that we all tend to work on. Josh says in the chat, Tower. He's used Tower for a long time. That was until Sublime Merge came out. Tower was my preferred Git GUI application, and it's fine. It's great. I find it frustrating now because I'm so used to the command palette in Sublime Merge and not using my mouse. But in any event, so back to databases and deployments. And again, I'm mostly focusing on websites and SaaS applications here. If you're actually doing actual software that is released to people, this may be less relevant, but here we are, Expression Engine users, so we're going to talk about this. First of all, you definitely should be automating your deployments. It's 2021. Don't use FTP. There's usually lots of steps to deployments, and having to remember all those steps is garbage. Manual deployments have high error rates. Don't ask me how I know. Deployments typically require multiple steps, and so automating that is much desired. Automation reduces errors and makes releases easy. And obviously you can have errors in automation, but the first time you encounter that error, you fix it, and then it's fixed forever, right? So automate the deployments. Automation then makes sure that it's right every time. So just at a high level, I used to, in this section, like I said, I've modified this presentation. I used to actually talk about the different tools that are available. Look, there's so many tools available now, I couldn't even cover them all, and it just depends on your needs and your strategies. I'm doing all Docker-based deployments now. Back when I originally wrote this presentation, I was using no downtime deployment strategies over SFTP, that the thing would run automatically and all this stuff. But there's just so many ways to do it. So I'm not going to go over that. But what I will talk about at a high level is kind of the strategy with the model that I talked about. So in my model, the main branch deploys to production. And I used to say maybe don't do this automatically. I actually do this automatically now because the main branch is protected, and so you can't just willy-nilly commit into it. And you have pull requests that go into it, you have reviews, and then when when things are merged into the main branch, it automatically deploys to production. So this is a take it or leave it. Like if you don't want to do that, you still want to manually click deploy, that's fine. I do have the main branch automatically deploy in my stuff that I'm working on. Again, you can have the support branches auto deploy where they need to go, and whenever you push code into them, so that once you push code into them, you can then send it on to the client and everything's automatically deployed. There's tooling in ways now these days, especially with Docker. Then it's really great when you can to say, hey, I'm going to click a button and spin up an environment based on my feature branch, feature.whatever.com. that's really great if you can do it. That's a less common thing, and it takes a little bit more elbow grease and setup, but it's really nice. So that's an option that you can do with these deployment strategies, et cetera, of course. And as I said, there's lots of tooling available to make this happen. And I have my own tooling that I've written that Doug keeps encouraging me to get into a release ready state. But maybe we'll see. Anyway, it's for more small time. I work on some small time DevOps on the side, and it's really great for that. But anyway, there's lots of tools available that you can take advantage of to get this done. So what about those databases and user upload content? Well, the first thing that you need to just be aware of is you always keep content out of Git. I can't tell you the amount of times I've come into an expression engine code base or some other code base that has user-generated content, and caches are committed, uploads are committed, everything, all these things are committed that's generated out on the website. And that has potential for, first of all, you're carrying a lot of megabytes of code around in your Git database, and that's not really what Git's designed to do. And it makes things unwieldy. And when you pull those down, hundreds and hundreds of megabytes, you're just sitting there waiting when you do the pull the first time for that stuff to download, and that's not great. So definitely keep these things out of Git. Use git ignore. This is more of a obviously a small monolithic git ignore. I've kind of switched to using .git ignore in the directory of stuff that I want to ignore, but that's a personal thing. A nice thing about that is you can commit your git ignore to maintain the directory, but not the stuff in it. You can do all kinds of stuff like that. But in any event, you can see here in this example that I'm ignoring system user cache, which you don't want to commit stuff in that directory. I have a .env.local that I'm ignoring. The uploads and captchas directory I'm ignoring, stuff like that. You would just want to be really careful about what you're committing and not commit stuff that shouldn't be in the Git repository. All right, so always review, in that vein, always review commits before committing. I can't tell you, again, the amount of times I've done this when I was new to Git. People do this, like they select all and commit, git add all, commit, and it's hundreds and hundreds of, you don't even know what's in there. And that's how user-generated content gets into Git. So always review your commits before committing. Make sure stuff isn't showing up that you don't want to. If something is showing up for staging that shouldn't be, update your git ignore strategy, right? And definitely never commit secrets and credentials into Git. Even if your repo is private, you're self-hosting, whatever, it's just a bad idea, because you never know, like maybe you decided to release, make this thing public, make it open source, whatever. It doesn't matter what the reason is. It's just a bad idea. Git is not designed to keep things secret. And there's all kinds of strategies like Git crypt and all this stuff, and it just adds overhead. Don't put secrets in Git. Just keep it out of Git. I disagree with that, Josh. In fact, my next slide says code and config flow up, user data flows down. Obviously, there are exceptions to config flowing up, but in general, you want your application to behave as much as possible the same way in all environments. So as much as you can, keep your config in Git, and when you make a config change, it flows up. And then if there are things that you need to have in config that need to be per environment, then you want to use you want to use environment variables. Like secrets, for instance, is a great use of environment variables. So in your config file, PHP has a function called getenv. And if you're setting your environment variables correctly, that will then get your environment variable, your database secrets and all that. So code and config flow up, or at the very least code, Josh. User data flows down, right? So I use scripts to sync the databases and user data down to dev and local environments as needed. I'm actually working in an industry now that needs to be HIPAA compliant, and so these have strategies with those scripts to scrub user data, to anonymize user data, and all this stuff, so that we're not, as developers, seeing that stuff as much as possible. And so you have to be aware of that. But in general, my sync scripts would pull the databases and uploads, rsync the uploads down and sync the databases down to your environment. So that stuff flows down from production. Your code and config flow up. So this is the one that I think everybody always struggles with, is what about adding new database tables and columns that your new code requires, or of course an expression engine, fields and channels, etc. Well, migrations are the best way to handle this, and we don't have first-class migrations in expression engine yet, Tom. So migrations are classes, at least in PHP, with methods to spin up your migrations and spin down your migrations. Your up method is where the schema is implemented, and down would reverse that schema. And migrations are run when they reach various environments. So they travel alongside the new code that requires those migrations to be in place. This is in private beta, as I understand. Anyway, it's Trek by Brian. And I keep hoping that he'll do something with that because it's a little more user-friendly than the one that I wrote, which is more for, hardcore PHP developers. But this is more like turn it on. It records the actions, the SQL queries that are being done. And then you turn it off, and it creates this file. As I understand it, I haven't actually used this tool yet, but it creates the file of the migration, and then you run those migrations when it reaches various places. As I said, I do have a tool for this as well. I haven't actually vetted it with Expression Engine 6, although I don't know why it wouldn't work with Expression Engine 6. None of the stuff that this add-on touches Expression Engine 6 didn't change any of that. So it's executive, and it does a lot of things, but one of the things it does is provides migrations, and these are ones you write manually. That's why it's not quite as Andy's posting secrets in the chat here. So click on that. Apparently migrations are something that's a work in progress. But anyway, the migrations in executive are something you would manually write. And I have tools to ease that, so you're not having to issue SQL commands yourself. But in general, the migrations, the idea is it runs when it gets out to the environment, and it updates the schema to be what it needs to be. Most of us are not working with migrations, or we have code bases that don't have migrations. And so what's the strategy for that? Well, if you don't have migrations available to you, then you keep a list of changes as you work on your feature. And this is where keeping your releases small and your change sets small really makes a difference, because you're not updating lots and lots of schema. And then when you deploy, but you haven't updated the schema yet, then it takes time to implement. So keep that stuff small, and you keep a list of the changes that need to happen. You have to be really meticulous about this. Okay, I'm going to update this channel to have these fields. I'm going to remove these fields. I'm going to add this and that, and you keep all that in a list, and then you implement it as part of Go Live. So those are the strategies for dealing with Git, databases, deployments, and all that stuff. That's all I've got for the main part of the presentation. The slides that you saw right here, if you go to this URL, it will redirect you to the slides in Google. I reckon it's time for some Q&A.
All right, thank you, DJ. So I'm going to click over on the Q&A tab and go through these by most voted. So Justin asked, how do you handle DB differences? I think you addressed that with migrations. Mm-hmm. Do you have any other thoughts if you're not using migrations for ways that you've handled that in the past?
You just have to be really meticulous about that list that you keep. Like as you're developing the feature, as you're working in your feature branch, you keep a list of any schema changes you make in the database, and then you make sure that gets implemented as part of Go Live. It's onerous. It's tedious. It's the way we've worked for years and years. You just have to be really meticulous about it. And make sure that you're writing the notes in such a way, you're writing your list in such a way that you can actually re-implement it. Because if you work on a feature for a week or 2 weeks, then you come back and you're like, oh, what is, I don't even understand what this means. So write those notes and like create a channel named X with short name or slug or whatever we call it in Expression Engine, channel short name, I think it is, X, and give it these settings, and add these fields. Like keep it, make sure that it's that you can understand what the notes are that you left for yourself. And I do not recommend Post-it notes, Jeff. It's fine if that's the way you work. A lot of maybe my wife is big into bullet journaling. Maybe that's where she would keep her notes. But the problem with that is if you're not the one that's doing the deploy and implementing the changes, it's harder for people to besides you to do it. And so I usually use a GitHub PR or a Git Lab merge request or an issue, something in the issue tracker, or put it in Jira somewhere where everybody can see it. And in case you get hit by a bus or something, like, somebody can implement it.
Yeah, and I can't, that's how, I've always done stuff, and I can't overstate how meticulous you need to be with those notes. Almost every time you click a button in the database, write it down that you did it, because you'll forget it and it'll prevent something from going live, all because of one setting that's not checked somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, and we've done it. We do it, or I do it a lot in Jira tickets. So like usually I have a parent for the feature and then all the other stuff. And in that parent ticket, I'll say, before you go live, here's all the stuff, and I'll make notes in there.
Yep, that's a good strategy.
Or dev notes in a file or something like that. So
yeah, that's what we did at Happy Cog. Is typically we put those notes for projects that didn't have migrations. We put those notes in a Jira ticket as part of Go Live. They would be implemented.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to delete these as we go. I thought I would. Of course, it takes a second here. Okay, Doug asked, what are best practices around undoing Git mistakes? I don't think you touched on that. Something gets pushed into a dev branch that you want to revert. Especially, a good thing with this too, regarding history, you mentioned not putting credentials or private stuff in there. Even if you accidentally commit something like that, undoing that and getting that out of your history.
So there are a couple of different strategies of dealing with undoing Git mistakes. If you're working in a branch that a lot of people are working in, and you've pushed your changes up to what you've designated as the origin server, and other people have had a chance to pull it down, then that's kind of there. You're going to create a mess for everyone if you try to amend that and force push it. So at that point, you have to consider that change out there, and then you create new commits that undo it. And if you accidentally committed credentials and you've pushed it to origin, no amount of trying to remove it is going to be a good thing. So at that point, you've got to change your credentials. This is why it's very important to keep credentials out. If you've committed credentials or any other type of mistake and you haven't pushed yet, git commit -- amend, or in your GUI tools, just, there's ways to amend commits. That'll be fine. It never got anywhere, and that changes your Git database. All references to what was previously there are gone. If it's not a credential that's important and you've pushed it, but it's a branch that only you are working on, or you're 100% confident you're the only one that has pushed or pulled from that branch, then you can amend your commit and force push. Use this sparingly. Make sure because you will create a mess for people who then have to do strategies to integrate your changes and remove the commit that used to have a hash with this, but now you have a new commit. The old commit with that hash is gone, and you just get an inconsistent state. It can be really messy. So if you do that, make sure you are the only one that has that commit on your in your Git. But yeah, amending commits is great. This is why sometimes I will wait to push as I'm developing until I have 3 or 4 commits stacked up that I'm going to push the origin server. That way, if I do need to amend a commit, it's like, oh shoot, and I can amend it and no big deal.
Awesome. And I will say, I think I said in the chat a few minutes ago, I use the CLI for all my Git stuff. And that kind of pins me down to only a few things versus when I get into the GUIs, I always see 100 different options. And it's just too much for me. But reverting and undoing the GUI comes in very, very helpful.
It does.
Because that's a pain in the...
And this is where I actually say it is really good to know Git on the command line. I'm pretty handy with Git on the command line. And if not, I know where to look to figure out what it is I'm trying to do. And that's because I force myself to spend a lot of time with Git in the command line. And so then when you use GUI tools, you may not know how the GUI tool works exactly, but you know what it is you're trying to do. And then it becomes really easy to use GUI tools. And with Sublime Merge, what's really fun is I open the command palette and start typing the thing that I want to do, and it starts showing up and limiting that list down, narrowing that list down to what it is I want to do. So it's really, really nice.
Awesome. All right, so they're starting to come in here. Jared asked a while ago, just for clarification, when you mentioned the main branch, are you referring to what is sometimes known as the master branch?
Yeah, you can call it anything you want. That's a convention. There's no such thing in terms of like actual Git software and what Git knows about. There's no such thing in Git as a master branch. Like that's something you designate. So that's all about your naming scheme. And of course, a lot of your origin servers like GitHub and Git Lab, they know about, like you can tell those things what your main branch is. But as far as Git itself is concerned, it's just a branch.
Yeah. All right, I see some people posting stuff about how they do stuff different ways in the chat. Feel free to take that over to the sessions here in a minute and just chat with others, and we can share all that with each other. Andrew asked, do you have a recommended CI tool for Expression Engine?
I don't. I've never really integrated a good CI with Expression Engine, but there are lots of things out there. At RxAnti, all of our stuff is running in Git Lab. Of course, it's not Expression Engine, but it's all like Git Lab will run anything you want it to, and so you can do all kinds of integration testing and various things. But I'm sure other people actually have better scenarios with Expression Engine than I haven't done it.
Gavin asked, can you copy and paste the link for the slides in the chat?
Yes, that would be a good idea.
People that didn't get a chance to write it down.
Okay, buzzing pixel.
We'll do that too. When we put this on YouTube, we'll have that in the notes. Since this isn't a conference presentation, I don't know that we're going to do a lot of post-production to this before we post it. So hopefully it's going to be live pretty soon.
Yeah.
All right. What is the best Git workflow when working with multiple web servers and a CDN?
There are lots of different ways to approach this. I actually did just come off a project at HappyCog that was using multiple web servers. It was using AWS and all the deployment tools with AWS. And essentially, your local dev doesn't really change a lot. You might, even for this one, we were using S3 for the uploads and stuff. And so we actually just had a dev bucket for both dev and staging. There may be better ways to approach that. And then you have your production bucket. But in some cases with a CDN, you may actually have a variable that you, in dev, the variable is one thing and it's your local dev URL. And in production, it's your CDN URL and your assets all get prefixed with that. So there's lots of different strategies there. As far as multiple web servers, we use the AWS code deploy and pipelines and stuff, and it literally just deployed to each web server in turn. So it would take, we had a load balancer and it would take one server out of the load balancer. And when it confirmed that it was our load balancer, deploy would then begin. It would do all the things it needed to do to deploy the code. And then it would put it back in the load balancer and take the next one out. And so it did that until it had done that to all of the web servers. And we had build running. So we had various things like in the build runs separately and creates a package that gets deployed to the servers. So we would build the front end assets. In this project, we had Composer, so we did the Composer install and various other things like that. So there's lots of ways to accomplish that. I hope that answers the question. That was the project that I was just on. That was the way we worked. But it's in general with load balance situations and CDNs, it's going to work something like that.
Yeah, I'm sure that can be another 30 minutes just talking about that. So.
Oh, easily. An hour, 2 hours.
All right. Mike asks, say two devs are working on an EE site. What type of branch structure and flow for keeping things in sync? Example, if one dev makes occasional template updates and the other is in charge of plugin CMS updates.
I recommend the exact same branching model that I just demonstrated or talked about in my presentation. It works really great. In fact, on the project, one of the projects I was on at HappyCog, me and a front end dev were often working on features together. I was doing back end and she was doing front end. And if it was a feature that they were related, I'd commit back end stuff, she'd commit front end stuff, and to the same branch, and that keeps us out of the silo. And so we both see each other's code, and we're integrating it as it gets written. It's a great thing. Sometimes if you have two backend devs working on something, you may touch the same line of the same file, and you got to resolve a merge conflict. But in general, it tends to be easy to do that, especially if you're again keeping your branch pulled often, keeping your main branch merged in a lot, and pulling changes down all the time. And it keeps you in a collaborative workflow and mindset.
Awesome. All right, it looks like that's all the Q&A that have been asked. So
I wanted to address this thing that Josh just said in the chat. GitHub switched from master as default to main. That's just a default when you set up a repository. You can designate any branch as your quote default branch in GitHub.
Right.
And what the change that GitHub made was just to change to when you create a new repository and you don't specify anything as the main branch, then it will default to the word main or to the branch main as the main branch. And there's lots of reasons for the change that are generally agreeable. So I'm happy to switch to main as the default branch. You can call your default branch anything. It's just nomenclature.
Yeah, in fact, for the Expression Engine repo, I'm not going to claim to. Jace is the one that's in charge of that, but for instance, ours 6.dev is actually our default branch, and 6.x is the current release version. Mm-hmm. And so if you pull down the GitHub repo to work on it, which if anybody wants to, you're more than welcome to work on bugs or submit new feature requests or PRs, all that kind of stuff. We'd love to have people jumping in there. But if you pull that down, the default branch that you'll be on is 6.dev, and that's what all PRs go against that are going into the next version.
Yeah.
So if you want to see what's coming in Expression Engine 6.1, which is well on the way, you can pull down or just look at the PRs in the repository for what's being PR'd against 6.dev, and you can see all the updates that we're pushing out there. And you can even pull those down, test them out, try them to see what's going to be happening. So lots of cool stuff coming.
Yeah, so Jared asks about stashes in the Q&A. So you mentioned stash, but maybe you could explain that to those who haven't used it. I find it very useful. Yeah, I find stash to be of limited usefulness, and I've also lost work with stashes just because I stashed something, and I came back to it later, and it's like, oh, we can't apply the stash because it would overwrite this and that. And so it's of limited usefulness. I find it the best use of it to be quick. Switch to, stash it, switch to another branch, do something, switch back, and reapply your stash immediately. Don't make changes in the branch that you're currently working on that you stashed from, or else you have the potential to lose stashes. It can be really frustrating, and stashes are super easy to lose. So, stashes can be very useful, and it's literally just, and you usually want to make sure you include untracked files, because stashes don't by default include untracked files, and so then you can get into a weird situation. So I believe it's -- untracked. I always use GUI for stuff, so I don't remember for sure. But so when you get stash, it just basically stashes it in a local database of Git, and then you can reapply that stash. Get stash pop, I think, is the command. And it's of limited usefulness. It can be very useful if you need to switch to another branch to get something done, but be very careful.
Yep. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to switch over to selecting a winner for a free e-conference spring ticket.
Yay.
Before I forget, thank you very much, TJ.
Oh,
that was a lot
welcome.
of information, and I really appreciate you putting that together for us. So definitely a huge thanks to you and for all you do for the community as well.
It's my pleasure to do.
All right.